Aesop has a famous fable, The Ant and the Grasshopper, and where we find an ant toiling along, filling up its nest with food for the winter, and it comes upon a grasshopper, and the grasshopper's out having a wonderful time. It's a beautiful summer day, and he's playing his little fiddle and having a great time, and he tries to get the ant to come and play with him. And the ant will have none of that because he just keeps working away, keeps filling up his nest. And then wintertime comes, and we find the ant nice and cozy and well-fed in his nest with all his little ant friends. And the grasshopper's out freezing and starving and dying because he just goofed around all summer. So this is a great fable about the importance of toiling and working endlessly without rest, and how if you can really just work, then you'll survive, you'll live through the winter. But if you have a good time, then you'll freeze and die. So it's actually not what the fable's about. It's actually about long-term versus short-term planning and the ability to put off gratification and to be able to control our impulses. The trouble is, a lot of things like this and other stories and teachings about the importance of perseverance and hard work too often come off as being nagged by your mom to do your chores. When really, what we're talking about here is the big thing. This is it. This is what makes us human. This is what separates us from ants and grasshoppers and bugs and things like that, is we can have a feeling, and then we can decide to do something that's more important to our long-term goals and values. We can have an impulse. We can have a desire. And we can decide to go in a different direction because that direction matters more to us, that we have consciously chosen values and goals that we go towards. We have 2 kitty cats at home, and when they feel like pouncing, they pounce. When they feel like hunting, they hunt. When they feel like eating, they eat. When they feel like sleeping, which is most of the time, they sleep. I can feel like pouncing and not pounce. And that is a really remarkable thing to be able to do. Now, there's one population that doesn't do this very well, and that's criminals. Aside from the image of the James Bond evil genius crime lord with this tremendous organization, most crime actually provides just immediate, easy, simple gratification. Or it's the pursuit of immediate pleasure or the elimination of immediate annoyance. And it requires very little skill, very little planning, and it provides very few long-term benefits. So it's really just like my kitty cats. They have a fun time hunting, but they're not choosing to do it. The other thing is it often results in pain and discomfort for their victims, which is why it's crime. Theodore Dalrymple, in his book Life at the Bottom, talks about his work with criminals in England as a doctor. And one thing that he found is the distinguishing quality of these folks is a lack of ownership for their own actions. So, for example, one fellow he interviewed was in there because he stabbed a man to death. Now, if this man were to say what he actually did, it would go something like this. Well, I was really angry with this fellow, and I was going to meet with him, so I made sure to bring my knife. And we met, and while we were arguing, I got so angry that I took out my knife, and I began stabbing him, and I stabbed him until he was dead. That's what he actually did. What he said was, we were arguing, and then the knife went in. Whoops. Just sort of happened. I don't know why. this passive voice makes it so that he doesn't have to take responsibility for his action. But it also makes it so he doesn't and can't take responsibility for his action. Because other people that he talked with said similar things. That, it's just my luck that I'm in prison on this charge. Well, it's not luck at all. It was your violent actions that caused you to kill a person that brought you to prison. Or they talk about how my mind just went, or I just lost it, or something must make me do these things. So what these people don't do is they're not owning their own role in their process. They can't bring themselves to understand that somebody within their own skin is robbing people, or beating their wife and kids, or breaking into houses, or murdering people. And because they don't have the connection between their own thoughts and consciousness, they can't connect the dots. Because you can't control something you don't acknowledge. And what this boils down to basically is a rotten premise. The idea is that if I have a feeling or a desire or impulse, I'm at its mercy. I have to follow it. There's not an option here. And if I have a feeling in response to somebody, if I have a reaction to somebody, then that person made me feel that, or that person made me take this action. That fellow made the other fellow stab him to death. And basically what this is called in my business is external locus of control. It's something outside of them is directing them, and they're not taking ownership of it. Now, in the 1960s, there's a psychologist, a professor of psychology at Stanford University named Walter Mischel. And he was noticing that his kids were beginning to play with putting off their impulses, controlling their own impulses. And he thought this was fascinating, decided to make an experiment of it. And he started studying preschool-age kids in terms of their ability to control their impulses. And it had a very long, wordy academic title, but we'll call it what it's come to be known as, which is the Marshmallow Test. Now, what Mischel had them do was sit in a room. They'd choose what treat they wanted. It might be a marshmallow, it might be a cookie. They had a choice of several different treats. And they were stuck in a room with that treat, and they had two choices. They could ring a bell and call the experimenter back in, at which point they could eat the treat. Or they could wait till the experimenter came back in the room themselves, and if they could do that, they'd get two treats. So they'd double their reward if they could just hold out for a while. Well, more like an eternity for a 4-year-old. It was almost 20 minutes. But some kids could and some kids couldn't. Some kids couldn't hold out for more than a few seconds. Some kids waited as long as it took. Now, what a lot of people took from this is that there must be some kind of fixed trait. Kids that young, they know how to do this. And then as a parent, you'd want your kid to be one of the kids that has that ability that young, because then they're going to be more successful, which is what Mischel and his colleagues found. Kids that were able to hold off for that second treat did better in school. They had better SAT scores. When they got out of school, they did better in work. They had more success and better relationships. But that's not the real important point of this story. The important point is Mischel and his colleagues were able to teach kids as young as 4 years old to be able to do this. So it's not a fixed trait. It's not something that some kids are just come into the world with this capacity and some don't. This is something that kids can learn. And it's actually very simple and very quick. The difference is the kids that weren't able to wait. They were seeing that marshmallow or that cookie or whatever it was in sensory-based terms. They were smelling it, seeing it. They could taste it. They could probably hear it calling to them. It was very tangible to them, and they just couldn't take it anymore. They had to have it. What Michel and his colleagues taught them was you could imagine a picture frame around it. And just imagine this is just a picture. And that made it abstract. So they're no longer being lured by these real tangible, real primitive kind of stimulus. It's more of an abstraction. One of the kids said, well, you can't eat a picture. So it was no big deal. And the kids that learned this were able to hold off just as well as the other kids. They were able to last as long as 18 minutes. And the fascinating thing is it worked the other way around. They gave some kids pictures of the treats, and then, of course, that's easy to wait for. But then they told them, but you can imagine this is real. And you can smell it, and you can taste it, and you can imagine eating it. And those kids then couldn't last more than a few seconds. So that's the leverage. And it's so simple a child can do it. Literally 4 years old, they were able to learn this very quickly. So what I'd like to do is have you apply this right now. I'd like you to think about something that tempts you. Something that pulls you off of your long-term values and goals. And I'm not going to ask anybody what it is. This is just within you and you. But think of something that draws you away from your goals, something that tempts you, that you'd like to have a little more mastery over. Everyone have something? Now, make it as sensory-based as you can. If it's food, think of the taste and the smell. If it's, kittens and puppies doing cute things on a Facebook video, think of how cute they are. And whatever it is, think of it in sensory-based terms. Really enter into the sights, the smells, the tastes, the sounds. Take a minute and do that. And notice what happens to the pull, the allure of that. And now make it more abstract. If it's some kind of food or something, make it into a picture and put it over there. If it's something on the computer, close up the computer, put it over there, and see that it's just a box. That's all it is. There's no actual kittens or puppies in there. Whatever it is, make it more abstract. And notice what that does to the allure of the temptation. Can anybody notice the difference between the two? Anyone care to say what they notice?
So I thought about my cats.
Mm-hmm.
Because I like to spend time with them. And I thought about, snuggling with my cats. And how nice that would be, especially because I'm tired right now. And, probably like to spend some time with my cats.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about, petting them, how soft they are, my fur. And then I put it into a picture frame. And I really genuinely missed them before that.
Uh-huh.
And then I put it into a picture frame, and I thought, it'll be nice to see them later, but I can wait.
Beautiful.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, Heather?
I did something kind of silly just because I did a money management thing. And so what I came up with, I thought of a bathtub full of money and jumping in a bathtub. So when they say filthy, stinking rich, I could smell the money stunk. I knew it was dirty. But
Mhm.
That's just the same number on a bank statement. It
Mm.
was just the number.
Mhm.
It wasn't the money itself. I couldn't smell it. I couldn't feel it.
Uh-huh.
Immerse with it, and it was just very monotonous.
Huh. Great.
Just that.
Yeah. So this is a very simple. This is really simple, but it's got so much leverage to it, and it's actually there's a similar. It connects to something that's been a mistake in popular psychology for a few decades now, which is that if you have a goal, you should really see yourself having achieved that goal and feel yourself in that place and have, deeply intensify the sensory experience of having achieved your goal. Whether it's, receiving a diploma or holding your finished book in your hands or wiggling your toes in that sand on the tropical island because you've made so much money. And it's a mistake. Now, we have to identify our goals, and we have to know them well enough that they're meaningful to us. But you don't want to hang out there. You don't want to embellish it and spend time there, because what it does is it's like giving yourself the reward before you've earned it. And what it does is undermines some of your motivation to take the steps to achieve that goal. So ideally, you want to have a clear idea of where you're headed and why it's important to you. But then mostly you want to visualize yourself accomplishing the steps to get there. And I'd like to move in that direction here and ask you to think of an important long-term goal that matters to you. Now, this could be something huge that's going to take 5 years, or it could be something smaller that might take a month or two or a year. Whatever it is, just something that's going to require you to persevere over a certain amount of time. So think of a goal that matters to you. And this one I'd like you to write down. And this, I'm not going to collect anything here. This is just for I'd like you to be able to take this home with you. So once you have that, now I'd like you to think of what's the first step, the first action you need to take to make that happen. Now this might be something you're already working on, so it's not, the very first step. But the first step from where you are right now, the first action you need to take in order to move towards your goal. And it should be something that you can envision yourself completing in a sitting, or in a day, or in a morning. So it might be something like you need to contact somebody, but that might not be the first step if you don't have their contact information. If you don't have their contact information, then the first step is actually get their contact information. Then the second step is to contact the person. So really see if you can find what that first step is. Because if you try and skip over one, you're much less likely to actually do it because you're stuck. You really don't have what you need to accomplish that task. So what's the first action? And I'd like you to commit to yourself on a time and a place where you're going to take that action. Monday at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to call so-and-so. Or I'm going to sit down and write for 2 hours, or whatever it is. But have it clear and tangible and something you can envision yourself completing. Now, the next thing is I'd like you to think of one thing that's going to throw you off. Because something's going to throw you off. We like to, usually when we make a plan, we don't imagine anything's going to throw us off because we can kind of see it through. But something's going to throw you off. Something's going to surprise you or throw you for a loop. Find one thing that can throw you off. It might be you're changing your diet and your daughter comes home to visit from college and makes the best chocolate chip cookies you've ever smelt in your life. Just speaking from personal experience. And sure, you eat a couple, or more than a couple. But then now the next question is, then what do? You've been thrown off track. What's the solution to that? If that happens, what's the solution? What can put you back on track when that happens? So I eat a few cookies, and then I see it as just a picture on the counter. Okay, now the next step. See yourself getting thrown off track. You're on your way to the goal, you get thrown off track, and then implement the solution in your mind. Just imagine yourself getting thrown off track, and then do what you wrote down that's the solution. And get back on track. And now do that again. You're going along, you get thrown off track by this thing, and then see yourself, imagine yourself implementing the solution and getting right back on track. Okay, now you've identified what's likely to throw you off, or one thing, and you've practiced a couple of times what will get you back on track. So when you do get thrown off now by this particular whatever it is, it's not a big deal. You've already practiced it a couple of times. You know what to do. So you're not going to be freaking out, oh no, I ate a couple of cookies. Now what? You already have anticipated it and practiced it a couple of times. And so you go off track and you move yourself back on track. These two things, finding the first action to take and identifying when and where you're going to take it, and then finding where you're going to get thrown off track and having if-then solutions. If this happens, then I get right back on track, are the most powerful things to keep you on track for your goal. And if you notice, probably what throws you off is likely some kind of temptation, some kind of emotion or desire or impulse, something that draws your attention away. And so the same principles apply with the treats, the marshmallows. If one of the solutions may be to make it more abstract. If you're tempted by something to get thrown off track, you make it more abstract. And then that brings you back around. What did you notice when you practiced the solution? Anybody? Great. Heather?
Well, I started that process that I always start when I started criticizing myself. Then I said, no, you didn't say criticize yourself. You said practice.
Exactly.
So I was able to redirect.
Good catch. Yeah, because shame is actually a very rotten motivator. There's a reason for feeling shame. It's got its function. But people, for example, alcoholics that stop drinking, but they keep berating themselves for their behavior after they get sober, they're the ones that go back to drinking. It's just a bad motivator in general. It tells us immediately that we've somehow violated our own values, and we got to shift gears. But once we shift gears, it doesn't really do us any good anymore. So that's a good catch. Now, it's important when you have a goal that it comes from you. I mean, Stephen Hicks this morning was talking about these people that want to nudge us and to do what they think the right thing is because we're too weak to do it ourselves. Well, what these people miss is that the most powerful motivation comes from our own wishes and desires and the meaning that we make of our lives and the meaning that we make of our goals. And so it's important that your goals come from your own creation, or you just won't have the energy to do it. But there is something, I'm in the world of positive psychology, and so I'm looking for what helps us be more genuinely happy, not some kind of, smiley face kind of looking happy, but genuinely happy, eudaimonia. And one of the things that we're finding is the tremendous impact that lifestyle has on our happiness and our mental health, frankly. One of the things, if we look at the past 60 years, the progress we've made just as a culture is phenomenal, not just technologically, but in terms of health and longevity, in terms of the quality of the environment, our choices, the amount that people travel, the level of violence is way down. You wouldn't know that from watching TV because you're seeing the worst of 7 billion people piped right into your limbic system. But the truth is we're a much less violent world now than we were 50 years ago. But one thing has gotten worse, and it's gotten worse by about 5 times, and that's depression. And one reason for that, so I want to move into lifestyle because this is one application of what we've been talking about here. Changing your lifestyle takes willpower and it takes conscious choice to do something. The most effective treatment for depression that we have right now is exercise, physical exercise. And yet, these days, about 50% of men and 60% of women get less than 10 minutes of exercise a week. And now the most popular treatment for depression is medication, and that's okay, there's a place for that. But exercise is as much as 2.5 times as effective as antidepressants. And there's a lot of course, physical benefits to exercise, to getting enough exercise. But there's mental and emotional effects as well. It helps anxiety, eating, addictive disorders, chronic pain. It can even decrease the risk of things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. We also sit too much. We sit a lot. And women who sit, this isn't a sexist thing. This is coming from a study of almost 9,000 women. Women who sit for 7 hours or more per day are almost 50% more likely to develop major depression. Women who don't exercise at all have a 99% higher risk of depression. And think of that 60% that gets only maybe 10 minutes of exercise a week. So this is with women, it's likely that similar effects are for men. 6 hours of sitting without a break if you're working out an hour every day and you think, yeah, I'm doing pretty good, but you're sitting for 6 hours a day, it completely negates the exercise, the benefits of the exercise. But if you do have to sit a lot, all you have to do is get up and move around for about 5 minutes, and then that counters the negative effect of sitting. Exercise increases the volume of the brain, the blood flow, the functioning of our thinking, processing speed. It's a very, very important element. You know, there's a kind of this stereotype of a dumb jock, right? But it's really not true. Exercise is very important for our mental health and our cognitive abilities as well. You don't have to be a world-class athlete. You just get enough exercise. And then another element is what we eat. And fundamentally, if you're eating a lot of vegetables and getting enough omega-3 fatty acids in your diet, there's just a lot of benefits in terms of your happiness and your mental health, as well as your physical health, of course. Young adults that have the worst diets are 79%, they increase their risk of depression by 79%. Those that eat about 7 helpings of vegetables have a very low risk of depression. And it can also affect the risk of developing Alzheimer's. I'm not going to read through each one of these. But a lot of this has to do with inflammation. We're finding, and I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nutritionist, but there's enough data in terms of lifestyle and how we can function in the world and our emotional health that this is important to integrate into our understanding of am I happy? How am I doing? No, I'm not feeling so good. Maybe I should change my diet a bit. And if you're in that position where you think a lifestyle change will help you, then we want to have a look at what we talked about earlier. What are the temptations? What are your goals? What are your actual values that you want to make happen in the world? And so hopefully this will be part of it as well. There's also the bacteria in our gut that turns out to be very important. Now, we have about 10 times as many bacteria cells in our body as we have cells of our body. They're a lot smaller, but they're important. And the prebiotics are the things that we eat, like vegetables and grains, that the bacteria feed on. And if you have a healthier diet, you're going to have a different population of bacteria if you have a lot of vegetables in your diet versus, say, a lot of sugar in your diet. And it makes a difference which populations are more prominent. If you eat prebiotics, which are the vegetables, you end up with significantly lower cortisol levels when you wake up. And that has to do with stress and anxiety. It also has to do with how well you sleep. So if you're not sleeping that well, or if you're feeling anxious, you can shift your diet a bit, and that can really help. We also pay less attention to negative things and more attention to positive things. And that might be a problem if you lived in a really dangerous area, but the truth is, for most of us, most of the time, our bigger problem is we take things that aren't dangerous as though they're dangerous. And we have a physical reaction thinking that, oh no, I'm in danger here. This is a real awful thing that's happened, when really it's not. Really, it's more of an overreaction, which served our ancestors very well when it was very likely we were going to be killed in some horrible fashion. We're not in most places like that now. And then there's eating things like yogurt and sauerkraut which I'm shocked that I developed a taste for, and miso soup. These things are connected with the information processing around depression and anxiety. Now, George Vaillant is in charge of the Harvard longitudinal study, which studied these Harvard students going back into the 20s. So they're in their 80s, 90s now, those that are still around. And he wrote a wonderful book called Aging Well, and using that study and a couple of other studies. And he came up with some very clear patterns that people that had lived well into their older years had in common. And he suggests doing 4 or more of these. First, don't abuse alcohol. What he found is the people that started dying in their 40s and 50s in this group were the alcoholics. Their health and their well-being just plummeted. So it's a very, very serious thing. Don't smoke, which I think we're all familiar with, the health hazards of smoking. Have a stable marriage. A good relationship has so much to do with not just our happiness and our well-being, but also our health. It's actually, in some measures, more important than the exercise you get or the diet you eat, which, as we saw, is pretty significant. Keep it a healthy weight. Doesn't have to be a perfect weight, but a healthy weight. And get some exercise. Again, you don't have to be Jack LaLanne or some kind of super athlete, but get some exercise. Get up out of your chair 5 minutes every hour. Do some kind of physical activity. And develop an adaptive coping style. And what he means by this is kind of getting the distance that I talked about from your impulses and your desires. Kind of make it a little more abstract. And so that if something affects you, you're not in it all the way and getting freaked out. I like to tell people, imagine that your feelings or your impulses or your emotions are like a wild animal wandering through your yard. Just watch it. You don't have to go chasing it, and you don't want to put kibbles out for it either. Just let it make its way, and just watch what it does. If you're feeling, really scared about something, take a little step back and watch what that fear does. Maybe notice it in terms of physical sensations, so you're not so attached to the feeling of it and inside of it. And so that allows you to adapt to situations and respond to situations rather than react to them. And get more education. This probably has more to do with the amount that we think about our lives and the different aspects of our lives than the actual diplomas or degrees. But there is a correlation with these. Now, Vaillant talked about moving into older age as like walking through a minefield. So if you see footprints through that minefield, follow those footprints. And so that's what he's talking about with his book here, is there are certain behaviors and habits and lifestyles that will get you through that minefield. But I'm more a positive psychology guy, and so I'm here thinking, what's a more positive image? Because a minefield isn't my idea of, where I'm wanting to hang out most of the time. And I realize I can't think of one. And there's a reason why I can't think of a metaphor that will fit for everybody for this kind of thing. And the reason is found in Tolstoy. The opening to Tolstoy's book, Anna Karenina, he says, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. With all due respect, he's got it exactly backwards. In 35 years of working with people as a marriage and family therapist or life coach or teacher, the things that people do that make them miserable are the most stereotypical, the most rote, the most predictable and the most boring. They're reactions to things. Most of them come down to following an impulse, or being too self-absorbed, or not having empathy with somebody, and just thinking about your own little world and not seeing the person right in front of you. There's most of the things that make us miserable are not that complicated. That doesn't mean that they're no big deal. They're a huge deal, and we've suffered terribly with them, and I'm not making light of them in saying this. But they're not creative. They're adaptive. And happiness is a creative process. It involves bringing greater consciousness to our thoughts, actions, feelings, and desires. And it's going to be unique for every one of us. So that's why I can't think of a metaphor that will fit for you or you or you. Because there isn't one that fits for all of us. It's too wide open. It's too creative. It's too full of possibilities. The great challenge and thrill of living consciously is that our path is new. Nobody else has walked this path in the same exact way. It's our own to create. And it's something that we own and create from the inside. It can't be created from the outside. And that's our great challenge. Thank you very much.
Excellent job. As always, if you could come up to the microphone if you have a question. By the way, exactly at the moment that you were talking about temptations and 4-year-olds, my wife texted me a photo of my 4-year-olds with big smiles on their face eating ice cream. And I just want to let you know I was disciplined enough not to get a shuttle to the airport so I could fly back so I could be with my 4-year-olds eating ice cream.
Well, that's an excellent catch.
Anyway, so thanks a lot for the technique. It kept me here. So anyway,
Great, thank
but
you.
I'll go back tomorrow.
Well, let me say one thing. I am in business, and I do have, you can sign up at my website or on your cell phone and get a free Learning Optimism course. I have this master's course in happiness that you can get a discount if you can transcribe all these complex things here, or just ask me. And I work with people all over the world with phone and Skype.
Yeah. Okay, why don't we go ahead and you know the drill, so ask your questions.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. You mentioned in your talk something that you said has gone wrong in recent psychology about this imagining things, and I was watching something by a fellow called Anthony Robbins. I'm sure some of you heard of him. I'm sure you know him. And he mentions there's a term which I don't know what it means, neuro-linguistic programming. Do you have a view on either NLP or the pop psychology like Anthony Robbins, and whether that is all just CRAP or there is some substance to it?
Well, it's interesting. I actually, when I was a young bloke, I was in a workshop together with Tony Robbins as a participant at an NLP workshop. And of course, he's done very different things than me. But there, actually, when I was studying the Marshmallow Test, I realized this is where they got some of their stuff. So I mean, one of the things that one of the techniques that I learned, I studied NLP back in my 20s a long time ago, and there's some stuff to it. But part of it is drawn from making things more abstract. There's a technique that they use that draws from this. And some of it's like most huge bodies of things, some of it's kind of baloney and some of it's really useful. So it's a mixed bag in my experience.
Definition of NLP?
Well, the idea is that they think it's kind of like Freud used the model of like, that's when steam engines were, and so you'd have this pressure build up and you have to release it, and Wilhelm Reich wanted to release the energy. Well, NLP was developed in the time when computers were coming out. So, we're computers. Let's program our our brains with linguistics, because I think one of them, Grinder, was a linguist, and Bandler did other things. And so that's the idea. And some of it's accurate, some of it's misses the mark.
I was wondering if you had heard of tiger moms and your views on them.
I think I haven't read the book, and so I can't, speak with any authority. But there's a real balance between holding it. But I do have kids who are grown now and doing pretty well, and there's a real balance between holding the structure that a child needs to grow in, so that they can know where the edges are, and making them do everything the way you think they should do them, or taking care of everything for them, which is a big problem nowadays. Some parents take too much care of every little detail, and then the kids get off to college and they don't know how to do it. So it strikes me as a more authoritarian style in a way, which works very good for inner city kids. It's actually functional for that. But, and it's maybe better than overly permissive parenting, which leads to more depression and not as effective, living. But an authoritative style where you're helping the kids to understand what's going on. That's the strongest model in general, for what that's worth.
Hello, Heather Wagenhals here. So I want to do two things. I want to give a testimonial to your master's course in happiness, because I think that for those of you who don't know that I have a radio show, he was the guest, and he actually made our Best Of series, which only 13 guests out of 10 years of being on the radio. He made it in a short period of time. So he's a great guest, but his information is very, very solid, and it's easy to follow. And I think that makes personal behavioral change so difficult, is because we have all this emotion that we have first. And so my question for you is, so once I conquer it once, if I'm inconsistent in my practice, so I eat the cookies this time, and then I say, okay, I distance myself, I make the cookies in a picture, so maybe next time I can avoid them. But then my daughter's really persuasive, and then you succumb to more chocolate chip cookies, and then your behind grows wider because you're getting upset and depressed, and sometimes you remember and sometimes you don't. How do you get back to that consistency for the long-term, like, health maintenance weight goal?
Yeah. You want to just keep at it and not berate yourself for the failure. Because the biggest danger is, let's say we're on a diet and we eat something that we don't want to eat, and then we go, what the hell? I've blown it. So now, then you go eat whatever you want, and that's the biggest danger. So what you want to do as much as possible is just kind of ride it and go, yeah, a weak moment, and then get back on track. Weak moment. And the more you practice getting back on track, the more natural that becomes. And
so the key isn't that you fell off the horse, it's that you got back on it.
That you get back on it. That's the key,
Okay.
Absolutely. Because you're going to fall off.
Absolutely.
Hi, I have a question that's a little bit off topic. Is that okay, or do you
Sure.
want me to wait?
Sure.
My question is, I've noticed, I've been rereading, Atlas Shrugged and the Fountainhead and some other works of Rand lately, and I've noticed that she uses the word contempt quite a lot.
Yeah.
And there's the characters act in a contemptuous way. Howard Rourke says to Tui, but I don't think of you. And my impression is that that's a horrible way to treat anybody. And I think that there's objectivists get the idea that is the way that it's okay to treat people that way. Would you comment on that, please?
Yeah, it is a horrible way to treat people, and it's a horrible thing to practice for yourself. I mean, it's just not a very pleasant place to live if you're thinking in terms of contempt. And actually, John Gottman, who's my favorite person on relationships. If you want to read a book on relationships, go to John Gottman's site and just grab one of his books. But that's one of his 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in a relationship, is contempt. If a couple has contempt going on, they're not likely to last very long. It's just a miserable way to live. And so, sure, it's not a very pleasant thing to put out towards somebody, but it's also very self-sacrificial in a way, because it's a miserable place to live. And the single most effective thing you can do if you want to feel good, have a positive emotional experience, is do something kind for another person. It's in our DNA that it's a good thing. It's a natural thing to be benevolent towards other people, and it feels really good. And to walk around feeling contempt or looking for whom you should feel contempt towards, it's just a miserable way to live. So, yeah.
Hi, Joel. Always
Hi,
enjoy.
Larry. Thank you.
Always off tangent,
Sure.
but perhaps you can apply chronic pain. And you know where I'm going with it. How can you use any of these tools to deal with or ameliorate chronic pain? Do you do any of that, or can you point me in any direction?
Well, I'm not an expert on that at all, but I do know that a lot of things like that, you want to find several different things that help. It's not like, oh, well, just do this, and then you'll. So a better diet, can help that. Exercise can help that. More positive emotions, just finding ways, more kindness, but also just steering yourself away from it towards something else. So you don't have to disown it, but you can not dwell in it and see, okay, what is there to be done? But it's a complicated thing, and I wish I had a real simple, just do this, but I don't.
I'm Carol Ventresca, and I have a question that's probably also off topic, but with the pervasiveness of personal cyber devices, personal electronics, and so forth, I wondered if you would comment on what you think about, let's say, elementary age children and their parents, and what the right answer is with this. For example, if it's no electronics, then the child is ostracized, he has peer pressure, he's self-image suffers, and so forth. On the other hand, you live on the tablet, you're talking to your friends, you're playing these games, and then you see the anger that comes in. Studies have shown that even adults develop anger when they do these video games, just by the nature of the game. So what's the right answer, and what do you predict that will happen out of this, and how can we direct children growing up in this world so that they don't have impulse control problems and need the immediate reinforcement that they're accustomed to with these devices?
Good question. It's kind of, when I was a kid, people spent too much time in front of the TV or on the telephone, and so these things are sort of our challenge. And it's not all good or all bad. It's complicated. And one of the things is that in some ways it can help you connect with people more. So that's a real positive thing. I'm connected with friends that I hadn't seen in a long time, and I'm delighted to be able to have some relationship with them. On the other hand, if you're in here all the time, you're not here. And I actually think that's less of a problem than we imagine it is. I think my son was telling me this, Dad, most of my friends, they're not doing that. They'll check their phone, but mostly they're here. So I think it's that element of it is less serious than we think it is. On the other hand, there's a lot to be said for time in nature and having a sense of awe. And when you're inside the box, you can sometimes miss a beautiful sunset, or I try and have a look at the ocean. I live near the ocean most every day, because that sense of awe also has a very positive effect on our emotions and our health, and just the sense of connection. So it's really kind of a balance. So.
Anything else? Okay, well, as always, an excellent presentation, and folks, there's where you can contact it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.